So we, along with Dr. Safar, designed the modern day ambulance. So that seat at the head where the paramedic or EMT sits, we designed that. The onboard suction unit, the BP cuff, the oxygen adapter that's on the side of the patient, we designed that. That seat, a couple of interesting points. It's my, you all are helping me fulfill the desires of my heart, whether you know it or not. And it's to get a part of history that's been dormant for well over 50 plus years.
It is an honor and a privilege, sir, to have you on this episode with us today.
Thank you so much. The privilege and honor is all mine, and I really can't thank you for this opportunity.
We were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I can't tell you how I've been excited since my wife sent you a message on Facebook. And I've been excited for this ever since. So for those that aren't aware, Mr. John Moon is going to tell us his story, but we're going to talk about Freedom House. And I made a really long post on Facebook as well about how I'm not disappointed in my educators, because I'm very, very close friends with them. I'm disappointed in the system as far as education goes in EMS, how this should be a topic of discussion when we're first getting into EMS. Everybody should know about Freedom House ambulance service. And because this is where it all began. For those that aren't aware, before Freedom House, if you had a medical emergency, you were either transported by police or, more commonly, transported by a hearse, by the funeral service. There wasn't ambulances until around this time. So this is going to be a great episode. I'm super excited for it. Thank you again for being here.
Up until just not too long ago, I knew more about the white paper than the Freedom House, and I think that's a disservice to everyone.
Yeah, I agree.
So hopefully we'll get some clarification. And you touched on a couple of interesting points. It's my, you all are helping me fulfill the desires of my heart, whether you know it or not. And it's to get a part of history that's been dormant for well over 50 plus years back into the forefront where it rightfully belongs. And you touched on a couple of things. One of my desires is to get the history of EMS taught in every EMT program, every paramedic training program, and as well as every EMS physician's training program, because none of those things were present at that time. So we're talking about the actual creation and the foundation of what we take for granted today. And as you talked about the pit, things that are glorified on television with a variety of different EMS programs across the media.
Cody, have you seen the pit, Cody? Or have you seen that episode at least?
So I've seen that episode specifically. I will be honest, I've never actually sat down and been able to watch an entire episode of that show. But usually the bits and pieces that I've been able to watch, it's a very, very good show. And it was honestly Instagram reels about that particular scene in the pit, discussing the Freedom House, that actually kind of steered me towards that show, and then doing a further dig into the I'll call it lost history of early EMS. So
yeah, I think what originally grabbed my attention to that show and my wife's was Noah Wiley. Noah Wiley was from ER, which was a very popular show when I was growing up. and I was a big fan of his in the physician role that he played in. So that's what originally got us into the show. And like typical medical type TV shows, there's obviously a little bit of extra drama added into it. I'm not going to ruin it for anybody that hasn't seen it, but there's a little bit of drama. But for the most part, a lot of it is about as accurate as you can get when it comes to medicine and Hollywood.
Hmm.
Um, but this specific episode that we're talking about, and I'm going to attempt, once I edit this, uh I'm going to try to add a little bit of that segment of that episode where the gentleman is brought in as a patient, and everybody thinks he's a physician because he's telling them exactly what to do and how to do it. And they're like, is this guy a doctor? Is he a retired doctor? And even Noah Wiley's character is like, is he a physician?
But one of the interesting things about the program, and I've had the um, privilege of sitting in a meeting with Noah Wiley. I actually gave him an autographed copy of the book American Sirens. So instead of me getting his autograph, which is the norm, he has mine. So, but
That's
one,
the way it should be.
but one of the consultants on the pit is a great friend of mine who's a pediatric emergency physician. And she is part of the community DEI project, which obviously has been retransitioned um, at that particular time. And it was um, her desire to get this part of history uh, back out there. And there's there's a lot of momentum behind it right about now, and as rightly should. And I just hope that that continues. And I'm on the mindset that I tell people and I expect them to tell someone. So that's really one of the most appropriate ways to get this part of history out, because most of the people think it began perhaps in Los Angeles or Seattle or Jacksonville or Miami with the uh, television show Emergency and things like that with Ronnie and Joy, Johnny and Roy,
Johnny and Roy.
and
Yeah.
and their red pickup truck. But no, uh, it actually began here in Pittsburgh in a uh, underserved community that I grew up in, and that's the miraculous part of it, is that when we started, it wasn't our goal to create a foundation or set the trend for EMS as you see it today. We were caught up in, I would say, living in the moment of providing a much needed service to this underserved, somewhat neglected community that had to rely on law enforcement uh, to uh, get you to the emergency room. And, we'll go back in time. So I love talking. So feel free to interrupt me,
Talk
No,
away, man.
oh, that's
That's the whole point of
perfect.
this.
you know,
Yeah.
and um, it's amazing because you talk about law enforcement being the primary transport system. Imagine a community uh, that had an adversarial relationship with law enforcement, meaning
Mhm.
that uh, the law enforcement at that time during the 60s, which were primarily the civil rights era, so racism was at an all-time high. Uh, Segregation was very fluent. So you had primarily an all-white police department serving
Mhm.
a predominantly black community. And unfortunately, law enforcement um, really didn't care about the members of the community. And the community, as a result, didn't trust law enforcement. So you had that adversarial relationship. And during that time, and we're going back to the 60s, um, there was no 911, obviously, and you would dial a 7-digit number and talk to a police dispatcher, and you would give them the particulars of what the problem was, and they would dispatch a police wagon. And the irony of this is that the police vehicle um, had nothing in it but a canvas cot. And so if you could imagine you calling for a medical emergency, a life-threatening emergency, and the police officer deciding whether I wanted to come or not, how long it wanted to take me to get there, or whether I even wanted to transport you to the emergency room or not. So this community, I would say, was kind of held captive in its own terrain because you have law enforcement adversarially, the political machine at that particular time uh, cared very little about this somewhat underserved community, and so housing was a problem, jobs were a problem. There were a lot of vacant buildings, and unfortunately, this I shouldn't say unfortunately, but historically, this community is known for um, its bars and jazz clubs and things like that, not the creation of an EMS system that we see worldwide today. And those are some of the things that I'm trying to kind of change because it's a part of history that's kind of been, oh, erased, for lack of a better term. So I'm open to your questions now, but unfortunately, I can go on and on and on. So.
That's quite all right. So, the explain a little bit about Hill District. Where is Hill District located, and has anything as far as um, I guess the culture has anything changed from the '60s to today? I guess kind of talk a little bit about Hill District and explain it from then and compare it to today.
Uh, the Hill District was in Pittsburg, Pennsylvania. It is really just like you have communities throughout the country. This community um, at that particular time was going through, um, I would say, uh, urban development, for lack of a better term.
Mhm.
So you had big companies and corporations coming in and creating buildings and entertainment facilities and things like that, and really moving the residents further and further away from that location. So you had what we call an upper hill district and a lower hill district. The lower hill district uh, became somewhat prosperous because that's where the urban redevelopment started. Your uh, buildings and your businesses and things like that, your sports complexes, and so in order to get those things uh, built, you had to remove the residents from that location. So urban redevelopment, in turn, they did exactly that. Started forcing people out of those communities or that lower part of the community further back into uh, another area of the community. And in order to do that, you automatically had to kind of provide housing for them. So if you could imagine, you had public housing uh, was coming up during that time, and during that time, since you were primarily removing African Americans from their homes, you placed them, or the government, the municipal government, or the state government placed them in the public housing complexes, and so it was kind of a condensed area. And so, despite the fact that you had still housing problems, you had vacant buildings because they tore down a lot of businesses and things like that, the community itself was kind of cut off from the political machine. And uh, we grew accustomed to that, unfortunately. Uh, and we had residents there that couldn't get back and forth to doctor's appointments. You couldn't get a cab to come into this community. Um, and during that particular time, we're talking about the Hill, but this problem existed throughout the country. And the federal government at that particular time was doing research on the survival rate of life, perhaps as a result of an accident or shooting or what have you, and which prompted the white paper. And it was determined at that time that you had stood a better chance of surviving a gunshot wound in Vietnam than you did on the streets of Pittsburgh, which is really sad. But here you have this community that's held captive, so the government start funneling money to try to offset poverty and things. And a small portion of that funding was given to a organization that was created called Freedom House Enterprise Incorporated. And it was sort of a storefront organization that a gentleman by the name of James McCoy um, created. And he was a community activist also. And in this storefront organization, they were primarily responsible for job training and job placement, voter registration. There was even a mini food bank in this organization to serve the residents of this um, underserved community. And it had a board of directors, which were a couple of attorneys and a foundation uh, people that funneled money into it to try to keep it afloat. And there was a gentleman in this community organization by the name of Phil Hallen. And Phil, at that time, he's 95 years old. Uh, I interact with him at least twice a week. He's still very active. And he came up with a vision. And that vision was, if this organization can deliver food to the residents of this underserved, neglected community, why can't they deliver medical care? Because, the community relied on the police. Um, you had residents that couldn't get back and forth to doctor's appointments. And in his mind, and he still feels the same way today, is what can we do to help this community? So his vision was, if you're using a truck to get food to the residents, why not come up with an idea to try to get medical care? But he didn't know how to get that vision into operation. So he reached out to the local hospital, which was Presbyterian Hospital at that time, and it's now UPMC. And they put him in touch with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Safar. And Dr. Safar was a visionary in his own right. And he was in charge of the critical care medicine department as well as the Department of Anesthesiology. And it was his vision at that time, is it wasn't how fast you got that person to the emergency room that determined the outcome, but what was being done for them before they got there. He did all types of research. He invented CPR and ways to breathe for individuals once they stopped breathing and things. But he had trouble getting his vision out to the world. No one believed him. The medical community kind of turned their backs on him. The political machine wouldn't agree to his teaching and things. So up comes this organization, Freedom House Enterprise, to try to improve medical care in their community. And Dr. Safar saw an opportunity to get his vision out to the world. And it was almost like what I would call a merger or a marriage, it turned out to be. Dr. Safar agreed to teach the members of the community on what to do before you got that person to the emergency room. And in turn, he would in turn get his vision out to the world. And Freedom House had one request: every person you teach has to be Black. And he agreed to that. So he takes 25 Black men at that time, and he put us through the most intense training that had ever been done anywhere in this country, if not the world. We spent time in the emergency room, not observing, but treating patients, time in the intensive care unit, treating patients, time in the coronary care unit, with the IV team, with the county morgue, studying anatomy and physiology, in the animal lab, um, in the operating room. You're actually talking to the very first layperson with a high school education to go into an operating room and to intubate an anesthetized, non-breathing patient. It had never been done before. And that was a challenge in itself, and I'll get to it later. But we got all of this training for a community that was somewhat underserved. And once we completed the training, uh, we were placed on a vehicle, and we discovered that the vehicles were kind of they were built right in order to provide the care. So we, along with Dr. Safar, designed the modern day ambulance. That seat at the head where the paramedic or EMT sits, we designed that. The onboard suction unit, the BP cuff, the oxygen adapter that's on the side of the patient, uh, we designed that. We discovered that it was somewhat too low to perform CPR or to stand up in, so we raised the head of it. Uh, we were the very first unit, obviously in the country, to transmit an EKG from the field back to the emergency room in consultation with the physician. So,
Wow.
so you have this ultra modern vehicle with the people trained to the highest standards. We essentially was a mobile intensive care unit. So we, in turn, once we got all this training and started out into the streets, and we were only allowed to service our own community. We were not allowed to service any of the affluent neighborhoods throughout the city. Now, the first challenge we encountered is that the community, mind you, were accustomed to the police coming to their door and placing you in the back of the police wagon and both officers getting up front and where you went. So all of a sudden, this vehicle shows up at your door. Two guys get out with afros and beards because that was the style at the time. And coming to your door, they're bringing in an oxygen tank, EKG monitor, a jump bag with IV equipment on it. And he takes all this stuff out and he starts taking the patient's blood pressure and listen to their lungs and putting them on the heart monitor and uh, starting an IV on them. And the residents, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? Why are you messing around
What's
with my
going
blood
on
pressure?
here?
Why don't you get them out of here to the hospital? So if something happens to them, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So we had to teach the community on what to do,
Yeah.
what we were doing, that we were actually bringing the emergency room to them. And that in turn, once we were able to teach the emergency room, the residents of the community, then we had to teach the emergency rooms because they were not accustomed to someone that looks like me coming in with a patient with an IV that had already been intubated. Me telling you that I have a 29-year-old male that suffered a syncopal episode at work. His lungs are clear. I put him on the monitor. He has a tachybrady rhythm. He has no real pertinent past history. His blood pressure is 120/80. I started an IV of lactated ringers on him, and here he is. So we got laughed at and mocked because they were not accustomed. So we got offended. So we had to kind of create a way to endure that. So we changed our approach. Instead of talking to emergency room nurse, who oftentimes greeted us, we looked for a doctor. And then we talked to a physician, spoke to him on his own level, and we started being received a lot more than what we were at that particular time. And, as I think about that, um, we were victims of our own success. And I'll talk about that a little later, uh, because no one else, we weren't concerned about the rest of the country at that time. No one else in the
Uh-huh.
city were receiving the type of care that the residents of this neighborhood were receiving. And once the city of Pittsburgh discovered that, well, let's see what we can do to get that service out of this underserved community. So we entered into a contract with the city of Pittsburgh to provide pre-hospital care to the business district. And, every year, say January, we'd get a check for about $25,000, which was a lot of money back then. And uh, that went toward payroll and vehicle maintenance and equipment and supplies. So here you are, we can only go to the Hill District and the downtown business district. And so we got accustomed to doing things like that. And so these are the only places that had the state of the art pre-hospital care, um, from a vehicle that we helped design and the training that uh, we uh, helped design too, with the assistance of Dr. Peter Safar.
When this all first started, what did I know we kind of talked a little bit about 911 wasn't a thing yet. It was a 7-digit number, but when Freedom House first started, how did that communication come to you that you guys had an emergency run in your district? I mean, I'm
We
assuming it came from dispatch, but did it come from the city dispatch?
Yes, via telephone.
Okay.
We had radios in the vehicles, and we had portable radios too, and we had a dispatch center itself that was located inside of Presbyterian Hospital, right outside the emergency room. So we had um, 3 units stationed at different hospitals, because we kind of divided the community up. One unit stationed at a particular hospital handled the downtown. Another unit station handled the middle part of the Hill District, and then another unit handled the upper part. And so if you got a call, you would dial this 7-digit number. And it's amazing that you asked that question, because the police decided whether they wanted to send us or not. So if they determined that there wasn't a police wagon available, they would say, okay, well, I'll call Freedom House. And they would call our office. Dispatcher would answer the call, take the information, and dispatch the paramedic unit, depending on where the call was located. Um, and so that was the way we got um, our calls, and that was okay. But we discovered that the police were not giving us the life-threatening calls in our community that we should have been getting.
That was my next question.
And once we discovered that, we had to come up with some way to offset that. So we bought a police scanner, and we started monitoring police calls. So whenever a life-threatening or emergency call came in the Hill District, we would self-dispatch, beat the police to the scene, treat the patient, and pass the police on the way to the emergency room, and they're still going to the patient's house. And
I
so
love it.
uh, we grew accustomed to different challenges on a day-to-day basis. That, okay, it's a challenge, let's come up with a solution for it. And um, we had the same problem with going into the downtown business district, because you have a all black service, and during that particular time racism was at an all-time high. So you had residents that didn't want us to touch them. I couldn't take your blood pressure because uh, you didn't want me to touch you because of the color of my skin. I couldn't put the heart monitor on you. So I had to, not me as an individual, but we had to come up with a way to offset that. So our response was, okay, if you want to allow me to provide the type of treatment that I've been trained to do, the chances of you arriving at the emergency room is starting to dwindle the longer we stay here, and I can't do what I'm trained to do. So oftentimes they would relent and allow you to uh, provide treatment. But we grew accustomed to day-to-day challenges.
Yeah. What what was going through your mind performing the first did you know you were performing the first endotracheal intubation while you were doing it?
I didn't know I was going to do the intubation at all. We had,
Sounds like my first one.
yeah, we had had all of this training, and we spent time in the animal lab, and we had mannequins and things like that. And so I was requested to meet Dr. Safar out, outside of Presby's operating room. Uh, okay, I'm going to meet him to talk to him about maybe a call or something. And I got there, and they put me in all this operating room attire and things like that. Um, and we entered, myself and Dr. Safar, we opened the doors to the operating room, and everything stopped. Yeah, it was as quiet as it is now. And the OR technicians, they stopped what they were doing. The surgeon that was getting ready to operate on the patient stopped what he was doing. The anesthesiologist who had anesthetized the patient stopped what they were doing. And they were all looking, I found out later, at me. And what I found out at that particular time is that the reason they were looking at me is because the only time someone that looked like me came into an operating room was with a mop or a bucket. But I didn't have that. So Dr. Safar walks over to the anesthesiologist who had anesthetized the patient, and they were unconscious and not breathing, and told him, "Get up. You sit down and intubate that patient." And at that time, I knew all these people were watching me. They had amphitheaters at that time, so medical students could look down. And I knew they were there, but I didn't see them. And believe it or not, failure was not an option. Because had I failed that procedure, there's a great chance that paramedics would not be doing it today, because we were
It's a
writing
lot
the
of
paramedic
pressure.
training manual, Emergency Care in the Streets. So I performed the intubation on the first try, and we went around during the course of that day to different rooms, intubating unsuspecting patients that were being prepared for surgery. Little did I know, less than a week later, I would take that same skill and take it out into the field and perform it in a patient's home, which obviously had never been done before. So you're talking about a challenge. I left that particular challenge, and okay, a big deal. I performed intubation. Let's move on. And I'd forgotten about it. And we went on a call with a patient that was unconscious and was having trouble breathing. Now, I'm accustomed to intubating patients and animals that were not breathing. So
Mhm.
we call our medical director, Dr. Nancy Caroline, and say, "We have this elderly gentleman who has a history of COPD and he's having trouble breathing. And what do you suggest we do?" She said, "Intubate the patient and start an IV on him." In my mind, I'm saying, you've lost your mind. And asked her to repeat it. I said, "Repeat what you just said." She said, "I said, intubate that patient and start an IV on him." So once again, okay, you submitted this challenge. Never thinking about I'd just done it less than a week ago. Got all my stuff together, intubated a breathing patient, and started an IV and transported him to the emergency room. In our mind, okay, big deal. Not knowing that I had crossed the boundaries of the medical profession. Took the patient into the emergency room. I got challenged by the physician. "Who did this?" I said, "I did." "Well, who told you to do it?" "Our medical director, Dr. Nancy Caroline." "And well, who are you?" "I'm John Moon, and I work for Freedom House Ambulance Service." And fortunately for me, there was a nurse that had been around once we were doing our clinical rotations at the various ICUs, and mentioned to him that they're doing that now. but that was just another challenge. And once again, Dr. Caroline discovered that we had done it successfully, she was, overjoyed. But okay, big deal. What is all the fuss about? And but we grew accustomed to challenges on a day-to-day basis.
Some of what you were talking about with your first intubation when you didn't even know you were going to do it.
Hmm.
It just it even reminded me of my very first intubation attempt. Now, my first intubation attempt was a complete and utter failure, so you've got that on me.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I forgot I was a paramedic student that day. Apparently, we go to a cardiac arrest, and the two paramedics that I'm riding with, I'm just standing there, and they're expecting me obviously to paramedic student it.
Yes.
I'm just standing there trying to do stuff like I normally do. And then all of a sudden, I get handed a tube and a laryngoscope. Oh, crap. I'm supposed to do this, aren't I? And there was vomit and secretions everywhere. It was a disaster. My preceptor ended up getting bloody vomit in his eye because I popped the end title off the tube and it went everywhere. And yeah,
Ooh.
if he watches this, he'll know who he knows who he is.
See, I'll take it a step further. I had seen intubations before when I started in EMS full time. What really got me was the first time seeing a crike done. I had never seen one done before, and even my partner, I won't I won't mention her name because I don't want to embarrass her, but even my partner was like, "I can't find the landmarks on this patient."
Hmm.
Our supervisor was there and he goes, "You just got to guess." And he goes in there and he makes the cut and he goes, "Tyler, put your finger in there." I said, "Okay." And my finger goes. I'm holding it open and all of a sudden he slides the tube in. He goes, "I need you to hold that for a second. I can't
Hmm.
find the tube holder," as we're going 80 miles an hour down the roadway to the trauma
Mock
center.
Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, this is the most wildest thing I've ever seen in my life.
And
I
and
was
and
brand new, but
and that's amazing because our hospitals were all within, I would say, 3 to 5 minutes away from each other. So we had,
mm,
you know, 4 or 5 hospitals right within 3 to 5 minutes away. So our response time was like 2 to 3 minutes to any call we went on.
yeah, ours was
Good response
probably
times.
like
Yes.
20 20 minutes, right, Cody? Give or take.
Just depending on where you were at.
Yeah, I would say the closest hospital from just about anywhere within the city, we'll say within the city limits,
Hmm.
probably about 20 minutes or so, give or take, at the longest to the hospitals. And we have two trauma centers. We used to have a burn unit, but that's
Hmm.
been gone for quite a while. But yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
I think it's
When
very, very interesting, like listening to you talk about, you know,
yes.
the more things change with EMS, I feel like it just stays the exact same because even you recollecting your early days in EMS, it sounds like me telling stories to this day.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And
And and
it's the similar experiences and just it's interesting to me.
and I looked at them all as challenges. So I was, welcoming each challenge as it came because, like I said, I grew accustomed to
Well, I'm sure there's
What
quite a
was
few
it?
challenges in first
it.
back then.
Yeah, right. Just a few.
Yeah.
What was it like working with Dr. Safar and Nancy Caroline? Because for those who don't know who are listening to the show, if Nancy Caroline's name is ringing a bell in your head for some reason, I encourage you to go dig up your EMT or paramedic book and look at who wrote it, because Nancy Caroline wrote your book.
Hmm. And she she wrote it while she was acting as medical director, particularly emergency care in the streets, with Freedom House. And in order for the book to be written, we had to prove that a layperson that didn't have an MD behind their name and what have you could perform these particular
Mm.
types of skills. And Dr. Safar was more or less an authoritarian because obviously he was in charge of um, the
Uh-huh.
departments, but he cared so much about the organization, and he had to determine that I can't give them as much time as they should be getting. So because he made various attempts to get different medical directors to work at Freedom House, and very none of them would stay. So we grew accustomed to that. That okay, here's this person coming in and padding their resume, and next thing they'll be gone. And when Dr. Caroline came, uh, we thought the same thing. Okay, she's coming, she's going to pad her resume, and next thing you know, she'll be out the door. But what we didn't discover at that time is she was different. We didn't trust her because we had no reason to. So she had to earn our trust. And she did that by spending time with us, going on calls with us, sitting in our dispatch center, waking up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, uh, challenging us or questioning us on a medical call while we were perhaps trying to sneak the patient to the hospital without starting an IV on them and things like that. So once she earned our trust, we discovered that her primary goal was to prove to us that we were better than what we thought we were. And she, in turn, showed us that she had a high level of confidence each and every uh, thing we could do. And it's perhaps difficult for people to imagine in this day and age, but imagine a 5'2" Jewish woman walking through the halls of a hospital with four black guys with afros and beards, walking into an intensive care unit, not saying I'm here, but walking right up to the patient's bedside saying, uh, what's the medication? Listen to the lung sounds. Tell me what you hear. What's the side effects of the drug? What's the EKG reading? What is the patient's prognosis? Uh, Listen to the heart. What are you listening for? Uh, Check to see if she has pedal edema. So she was challenging in us on a continuous basis and building up that level of confidence. She taught me how to read an EKG in 15 seconds by asking me different
Wow.
questions about it. And it was amazing that she was teaching us, but we were also teaching her uh, to a point where uh, she could identify with the challenges and the hurdles and the barriers that we had to overcome on a day-to-day basis. And she became part of us. She's someone that we actually uh, admired and loved while she was there. And so she passed in 2002, and believe it or not, I still miss her. And that's the impact that she's had upon her. And it's ironic because when she left and went to Israel, she started Israel. She became medical director for Israel, and she
Oh, I
designed
didn't
their
know that.
entire EMS system, and their vehicles were patterned after Freedom House's ambulance services. Hmm.
So it's
Wow,
not
I
even
did
just
not know that.
a a country or just an influence in this country that you guys um started. It branches out even
Hmm.
international across borders.
Yes, yes,
That's I did I didn't
right.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah, wow. See, before we did this interview, I told my wife that I wish I had a time machine because I would love to go back in time. And I don't need one because we've got you here, and the
Yes,
way
take
you
you
just
back in
paint
time.
these stories for us is I feel like I'm there. Like this
Yes.
is incredible. How long did Freedom House go on for?
Um, from 1967 to 1975. And um, as I mentioned earlier, we became victims of our own success. Um, we were only allowed to provide pre-hospital care to the Hill District and downtown business district. And your affluent communities had to rely on law enforcement to get them to the emergency room. Uh, one day in one of your affluent communities, a child was struck by a bus while riding a bike, and it was a very traumatic injury. Um, and the police arrived on the scene, and they were kind of overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do. They'd never seen anything this traumatic. So the police officer gets on the radio and says, um, "Can you send Freedom House out here?" And the dispatcher says, "No, I can't, because it's not their district." Remember, we were monitoring police radio.
Oh yeah.
So we heard the call and we self-dispatched to the scene, treated the child, obviously saving his life and transporting him to the emergency room. But what we didn't know at that time is the community saw that. They saw this ultra-modern vehicle with this highly skilled individuals coming out in a chaotic situation and bringing calm to this incident. And they, in turn, went back to their political opponents, political machine at that time, and they questioned, how dare you allow those residents over there in that rundown public housing, public assistant community have better medical care than I do? I voted for you. I contributed to your campaign. You better do something. At that particular time, the mayor was running for re-election. So he had to bow to the wishes of his constituents. Now, so the common sense thing to do is, you got this system already in place. Why not expand it to the rest of the city? But he didn't have control over this organization, so he decided to create his own EMS system. And there was no room in it for an entity such as Freedom House. So he just couldn't say, you're no longer uh, able to operate. So he came up with what I would call a strategic way to eliminate the organization.
He choked you guys out.
Yeah. Remember, we had a contract to provide pre-hospital care to the business district. We get a call to the mayor's office one day and to come see him. And in our mind, we're thinking, wow, the mayor is going to expand Freedom House throughout the city. Uh, so we're going to draw up a plan on where you could put an EMS unit throughout the city of Pittsburgh. So we take this plan down to the mayor's office and handed it to him. And he takes it and he says, I'll give it to my director. He puts it on his desk and he says, the reason I called you down here is your sirens are making too much noise. Can you put a bell or something on the truck, like an ice cream truck? So he issued an executive order that whenever Freedom House went on a emergency call to the downtown business district, we were not allowed to use our sirens. So if you're lying in the middle of the street, unconscious or been struck by a vehicle or something like that, and we get called, we had to stop for the light, wait for it to change, move to the next light, and that impacted our response times. All behind the scenes, he's creating his own EMS system. In addition to that,
I hate
remember,
politics.
we had a contract with the city of Pittsburgh to provide pre-hospital care to this business district. Every year we would get this check, say in January of at the beginning of the year. We use that money for payroll and vehicle maintenance and equipment and supplies and things like that. January of 1975, we got it instead of a check for $25,000, we got a check for $5,000. We didn't get anything in February. March, we got another check. So that put us in a position where we had to reach out to different foundations to get additional funding just to stay afloat. All behind the scenes, Pittsburgh EMS is having brand new vehicles and brand new equipment and state-of-the-art services and things like that, while we're struggling to stay afloat on day-to-day operations. So we had to make a decision. And that decision was, do we continue to struggle and rob Peter to pay Paul, uh, or do we cut our losses and turn everything over to the city of Pittsburgh and dissolve the service? And our administration chose to do that. October of 1975, we chose to cease operations, turn everything over to the city of Pittsburgh. We entered into a written agreement that Pittsburgh EMS would take Freedom House's equipment, Freedom House's vehicles, its personnel. We would not have to go through any additional training because we were already been trained by the best. November of 1975, we think it was going to be a smooth transition. It turned out to be a very traumatic one. We reported to work November 3rd of 1975, only to discover that we entered into a system where we were not wanted. The mayor had created an all-white EMS system, and he brought them from the suburbs into an urban environment. And unfortunately, at that particular time, they came into the city with preconceived ideas on what it would be like coming into from a suburban environment to an urban environment. It's the most dangerous place in the world. I have to prepare myself. So they came in with knives and guns, and the vehicles had handcuffs on them, and 7-cell flashlights, which were about this long, not to find your way around in the dark, but to use as a weapon because I'm in this dangerous community. The personnel were dressed just like police officers, so that authoritarian mentality was there. It was not unusual for a Pittsburgh EMS ambulance to pull over a driver that had ran a stop sign or a red light. They couldn't, write tickets or anything because they didn't have, but just the mentality of doing that and yelling at the person for doing that. So we entered into this system with all of this training, despite the fact that I was the first person to do a tracheal intubation. The personnel, we had a written agreement that they would accept the training, which the department reneged on. They refused to accept any of our training. So we had to go through additional training that was not certified because we had been trained by Dr. Nancy Caroline and Dr. Peter Safar, who were visionaries and pioneers in the training into the city of Pittsburgh's system. So in addition to that, we were subjected to last-minute schedule changing and things like that. We were relegated to the role of an observer, all with the intent of frustrating the people to the point that they would say, okay, I don't need all this hassle, I'm out of here. And it worked. Unfortunately, Pittsburgh EMS was able to eliminate 85% of all the people that came over from Freedom House. And only 5 remained out of 30, 35 people that came over. If you think about the agreement, it said you had to keep the people, take the people, but it didn't say you had to keep them. So the department went on an elimination process. And earlier we were talking and you said you had never heard of Freedom House. And obviously most of the country hasn't. And even though that saddens me, I understand the reason why, because it was Pittsburgh EMS's goal at that particular time, unfortunately, to eliminate any memory of this service. You do that by getting
N-
rid of the people. So if you eliminate the history makers, you essentially eliminate that part of history that they made.
Not if
So
I have anything to say about it, because we're going to keep talking about
yes,
it.
I and so, I was one of the 5 that remained. And remember, none of my training was accepted. I was relegated to the role of an observer. I couldn't drive the truck, couldn't talk on the radio, couldn't examine patients. I was just to sit there. As fate would have it, one day we went on a call with the crew. Remember, I can't do anything. Not allowed. That was put out there in a memo to all of the personnel.
Why did you stay? Why were you one of the 5 that stayed?
Well, that's an interesting point because I went on a call with the crew that I was working with, and we went into a person's home and the person was in cardiac arrest. And the crew that I was working with, they didn't know what to do. They panicked. So they looked at the person that wasn't allowed to do anything and said, "You take over." So I said, "Okay, well, you start the IV, you put the person on the heart monitor, I'll start the trachea, I'll do the intubation." And we subsequently saved the person's life. And that was great, but it had to be kept quiet because I wasn't allowed to do anything. So that
Uh-huh.
put the responsibility on me. Do I remain this quiet, unnoticeable person who's not allowed to do anything, or do I step up my game? And I chose to do the latter. I chose to make sure that Pittsburgh EMS knew exactly who John Moon was. And I did that by challenging the department. I challenged the department on the equipment that it was using. I got the handcuffs taken off and the flashlights removed and things like that. And then I discovered that the paramedics were trained, that people that lived in underserved communities and public housing complexes didn't have heart attacks and strokes. The only calls you were going to get were domestic violence and drug overdoses and shootings. If you wanted those kind of medical calls, you would have to work on a unit that handled an affluent community. So I challenged the department on its training, and I started getting noticed, and uh, I started getting promoted. As I'm rising up through the ranks, I noticed that Pittsburgh EMS had not hired anyone that looked like me. Pittsburgh EMS went 10 years without hiring an African American. So I challenged the department on its hiring process. And okay, that's your problem. Then you come up with a solution for it. So I designed the very first diversity recruitment program in the history of the city of Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh EMS was the model. And I used the same format that we used at Freedom House. I went out into the community and I recruited people that didn't know what an EMT was or a paramedic, had never talked to one, had never heard of one, put them into a training program, got the department to pay them a salary while they were going through their training, and got the department to hold job vacancies open because I just invested all this money into your training. I don't want you to go anyplace else. So I can guarantee you a job. And 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 that was the normal way that Pittsburgh EMS hired all while I was there. There was never an all-white EMT program and all-white paramedic training. It was racially divided through race and sex. And what I didn't notice at the time, and I'm doing all of this, I had gotten promoted to the position, it was chief supervisor, that I handle all the day-to-day operations of the department. Everything went through me. Complaints, promotions, hirings, terminations. I had 10 field supervisors that reported to me. So everything went through John Moon. And what I didn't notice at that time is I'm doing all of this. I was sabotaging my own career. The department had what I would call a next man up promotional process. And it's a process that if I'm at this level and a position becomes available above me, I'm automatically promoted because I got all this experience and things. And they had used that process for 30 years until it was time for John Moon to be promoted from the chief supervisor position up to the assistant chief position. I got passed over by a white male that I'd been his boss for 15 years. And I was ordered to teach him my job duties because they had taken them all away from me, and which made him eligible for the next promotion. So I challenged the department on that, and I was given a token title. So the department, for the first time in history, had two assistant chiefs. Only one of them was making $8,000 a year more than the other one. I don't need to tell you who that person was. So I was relegated to the role of teaching CPR and handling complaints. I couldn't do anything else. The 10 supervisors I was responsible, they were not allowed to interact with me. I was essentially ostracized. So another position opened up to the deputy chief position. And this other person got promoted to that. And I'm saying, come on now. So I challenged the department I sued the city, sued my employer for racial discrimination in its hiring and promotion. So you don't sue your employer, you expect to live a happy life. So um, Pittsburgh EMS at that particular time made my life a living hell. I was ostracized. No one was allowed to talk to me. Um, I was just there. And I had to make a decision. Do I stay around here just to show you how tough I am, or do I cut my losses and move on? So I chose to retire after 34 years with Pittsburgh EMS, not knowing that I had to come to a moment of reckoning for two things. The first thing was no matter how good I was, what I created, what I designed, I was never going to be promoted to the position to run that department, meaning become the chief of the department, because it was designed to prevent that from ever happening. The second thing I had to come to grips with is that wasn't why I was there. I wasn't there to rise up through the ranks to one day become chief of Pittsburgh EMS. My job was to break down hurdles and barriers and roadblocks that when people that looked like me came after me, that they would have an opportunity to get in. So John Moon rides off into the sunset. The city of Pittsburgh um, elects his first African American mayor in the history of the city. And he was someone that I'd worked with personally doing my diversity recruitment program. So he knew all the hurdles and the pushbacks and the blowbacks that I'd had. And usually in municipal government, you serve at the wishes of whoever the political leader is at that particular time. So he comes in and he looks at Pittsburgh EMS and he sees an African American in the deputy chief position. He tells the chief at that time, and the chief has always been a white male, we're going in a different direction, so I suggest you retire. So the chief retires. He appoints the very first African American in the 50-year history of Pittsburgh EMS, an African American female. And the irony of it is she's someone that I personally hired doing my diversity recruitment program. So even though I'm no longer there, my legacy and the legacy of Freedom House still lives in Pittsburgh EMS through her. So she comes in and creates what they call a Freedom House EMT Academy, which is part of Pittsburgh EMS's hiring. And she goes out into the community and recruits people and places them into an EMT program. If they want to become advanced EMTs, she's allowed them to go into advanced training, pay them to go, and they don't have to work. If they want to become paramedics, she puts them into a paramedic program, pay them to go to school, and they don't have to work. And she has a 100% success rate of them passing the National Registry exam. Uh, no one has ever failed it. So
Wow.
that's the legacy of Freedom House Ambulance Service. And it's amazing that, as I talked to you all earlier, that wasn't our goal, was to set the standards and create something that had never been done before. And we were living in the moment, providing a much needed service for this underserved community. And out of that was born the very first pre-hospital care system, the training manual, Emergency Care in the Streets. There are two documentaries out, First Responders and Heroes on Call, um, as well as American Sirens, the book written by author Kevin Hazard.
You became a certified master scuba diver. Is that correct?
Yes,
What?
yes,
Not only did you become a certified master scuba diver, you're as far as I know, the first and only African American to do that.
yeah.
What made you decide to do that?
Well, it was a challenge. It was a challenge. So remember, I'm accustomed to challenges, both at
Mhm.
Freedom House and, and at Pittsburg EMS. So here you are presenting another challenge to me. So I knew nothing about ice diving and diving at night and rescue diving and you know going underwater, cutting a hole in the ice and jumping in it and swimming around down there with the fish and stuff like
I
that.
think you're nuts,
Yeah,
but we'll go with it.
yeah. I never knew anything about that, but it presented a challenge, and you know it's something today because I grew accustomed to challenges from my early childhood, and it's to a point where I don't believe there's anything that I can't accomplish. And to tell you all, I'm 77 years old right now, and uh, I still am under the mindset that there isn't anything I can't do. It may take me a while to finish it, or I may put it down, but I have to come back to it because that's all a part of my makeup. So the diving was just a challenge. That's all it was.
That's awesome. I love it. When they were filming that episode on the pit, specifically season 1, episode 8, were you aware that they were going to be including Freedom House in that episode?
Not at that time. I was informed of it later, um, and you know, I'm not upset with you all because I don't look at the pit either. So no, no, I, I probably will start, but I just saw that one episode, and
Mm,
and that was it. Because I was informed that it was going to be aired at a particular time, and I made sure that I saw that particular episode. And it's very authentic, and a lot of the
mhm.
things that go on in the pit are authentic because you have doctors as consultants now teaching the Noah Wileys and all the other actors on what to do in real life. So I am glad that part came up. It made my heart smile, um, but I still think that there's still a lot more work to be done to get this part of history back out there.
I agree. Can you tell us a little bit about the book American Sirens for those that haven't read it? Um, Again, that's American Sirens by Kevin Hazard, and it's on my list of books to read. But can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, the book actually chronicles um, not only the history of Freedom House, but it chronicles my life history, the first 10 chapters. It took Kevin and I roughly about 4 years uh, to complete the book. And it, it, I've read it, but it took me a while to read it because uh, the book takes me all the way back to my childhood. And I had put that
Mm,
part of my life back here. Not that in today's world, um, people would look at it as a very traumatic experience, but I look at it as one that motivated me to get to the point where I am now. So it chronicles my growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, during a segregation era where there was still, you know, schools that you couldn't go to, stores you couldn't shop at. Um, you couldn't sit in the front of the bus. There was uh, a no such thing as a integrated police department or anything like that. Um, my uh, mother died when I was about 5 years old, and my father was left with um, trying to take care of a 5 year old and a 3 year old child. And it's
mm,
interesting because he still had to maintain employment. So he went to work every day and left me and my sister home by ourselves. Obviously, you can't do that today. And we didn't get into any trouble. We didn't set the house on fire or didn't tear up anything or nothing. And so that part of my life was one of sheer poverty, living in a home that didn't have uh, warm water, uh, no electricity. We used kerosene lamps. There was no such thing as gas stoves and stuff like that. I took baths in tubs, aluminum tubs. Bathroom was an outhouse and things like that. So my father at that time had to make the ultimate decision. Is it fair for me to leave my two kids in this type of position or condition, or do I just turn them over to someone else? So he made the ultimate sacrifice where he placed me and my sister in an orphanage. So she
mm,
and I grew up in an orphanage with about 75 or other 80 children for about mm, seven, 7 or 8 years. We lived in an orphanage, and I got adopted by a family that I didn't know I had, and came here to Pittsburgh in 1963, uh, June 27th, to be exact, on a Greyhound bus. Uh, and that was a traumatic experience too, coming from uh, an, um, a self survival mentality into one where uh, you're coming into a family environment. And it was very difficult for me to adapt in a family environment because I wasn't accustomed to that. So, you know, there was a certain amount of trauma associated with that. Into today's vernacular, people would say it was PTSD, but they didn't have a name for it then. But I
mhm,
couldn't adjust, and I got to a point, or I got to a point where my mother that adopted us got so frustrated with, not that we were violent or anything, we were kind of self-sustaining. So I would leave and go off, didn't tell anyone where I would come. I'll come back whenever I felt like it and stuff like that, because I was self-sustaining. And she got so frustrated to a point that she wanted to send us back to the orphanage. And before she did that, she said, "Well, let me see if there's any hope, primarily for him." And she convened social workers and um, psychiatrists, and they came to the house, and and she was explaining to them what a troubled child I was. And he just leaves and thinks, I don't know whether I can take it anymore. And I'm sitting there listening to all of this. I'm about 14 years old. And I'm listening and not understanding fully what's going on. But she made one comment that I think kind of redirected my whole life. And she was talking to this social worker, and she told them that the family that I was supposed to be a part of told her not to go down and get us, that we didn't have any home training or anything, and don't do it. And they said, Mary, don't do it. And once she said that, it kind of, oh, I mean, that was an awakening, for lack of a better term. Here I am in this house, and nobody wants us here. So it put the onus back on me that I left that meeting, not angry or anything, because I was very hurt, but because I it was discovered that we weren't wanted there. And I went to the bedroom and I sat in a corner, and I remember this like it happened yesterday. And I said, Lord, if you ever get me out of this, no one will ever have to take care of me again. And shortly after that, probably about a couple of months later, I got a job, and I've kind of been Mr. Independent from from that point on. And that was awakening. So, you know, whether I knew it or not, every part of my growing up was already preordained. It was going to happen anyway. There was nothing I could do about it. The only thing I could do about it, it was preparing me to deal with the challenges and the hurdles and the roadblocks and the barriers that were going to come later on in life. So as we were talking, I looked at everything, and I still do, as a challenge, not as something I can accomplish. It's just a challenge because I was being prepared for it from the age of, I would say, 5 years old all the way up until now. And the book covers that part of it, which made it difficult for me to read it because I'm reading all this and
Yeah.
it's bringing all this back. So it took me roughly about 2 to 3 weeks to finish reading the book. And
Did you ever go back and find your dad?
well, he died while I was in the orphanage. So we were
Oh,
simply, essentially, wards of the state or the county or whatever the case is.
yeah.
We didn't have any parents. Hmm.
Man.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine that from your dad's point of view. I can't imagine from your point of view. Like, oh man, all of that would be hard.
And and you're absolutely correct because it it it's amazing in itself because we went there twice to visit. And we went to this facility and they said, okay, well, unbeknownst to us, we're children. We went outside and started playing with the 75, 80 other kids that were there. And, you know, a couple of hours went by, they came and got us, and our father took us back home. We didn't know that he was signing paperwork to sign us over to these people. So we went the second time, and
Mm.
in our mind, okay, we're going back to the same facility. Let's go back out here and play. And we went out this playing, and it dawned on us nobody's come to get us yet. So we went back inside to look for our father, and he was gone. Yeah.
That's
So
heartbreaking.
we so we had to adjust at a moment's with living with 75, 80 other kids who were in the same situation that we were. Kids that perhaps didn't know who their parents were, had never seen them in years, didn't get any phone calls, mail, letters, and nothing. Um, and they were resilient. It was the most resilient bunch of kids I'd ever be around because half of them never even knew who their parents were. Because at that time, the police could take you and put you there, and your parents didn't have an option. So I grew up in an
Yeah.
orphanage with about 75 other kids, both males and females,
Wow.
and that's outlined in American Siren. So just a challenge.
I think I think that book just climbed up to the top of my list now because wow,
Uh,
I have no words. Man.
And you just described a what some people would call a very traumatic, emotionally traumatic childhood as just a challenge.
mhm.
That
Yeah.
that says something about you, honestly.
And
Says a
that's
lot.
understandable because that's what was able to get me through the challenges at Pittsburg EMS because my diversity recruitment program was met with all kinds of blowbacks and pushback. There was racist comments on the bathroom walls of the emergency rooms, not written but carved in the uh, doors. And the people that I selected for the training, they didn't know it, but failure was not an option. There was no way I was going to allow them to fail because I was not going to allow the department to say, I told you so. So I
Mhm.
did whatever it took to make sure they passed this course. And that same type of mentality is with the chief of Pittsburgh EMS today because I mentored her and I instilled that type of, you know, resiliency and perseverance uh, in her because she ran up against the same type of challenges.
Hmm. You know, my my hope out of this interview, and it has nothing to do with Cody or myself. It has everything to do with the Freedom House organization. I hope that every EMS academy across the country has to watch either this or read American Sirens and get an understanding of what how EMS started.
Hmm.
I think I think there's so much information in here that if I was still in EMS today, this would drastically change how I approach the job for good reasons. For good
Hmm.
reasons, because this I'm I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but when I started in EMS, I was told, I'm not going to say who, but I was told by a few people that, well, EMS started from emergency. That's how it started. Emergency came on TV, and then all of a sudden it just blew up across the country. So that's what I believed. And a lot of that's on me. Like I should have done more research on it, but it saddens me that
I mean, there was no
this
reason
should be
to
talked about.
assume that you needed to do more research into it
Right. Right.
because
And you're absolutely
that's
correct. And what people don't realize is that at Freedom House, we actually sent our personnel to Los Angeles to talk to the producers that produced that show, Emergency.
Really.
Hmm. Yeah, Emergency came on board in 1972 and
Hmm.
to 77, but we had already been operating for about 5 years. So
Right.
we consulted with the producers of the television show. I
Well,
didn't,
that's
but
awesome.
the personnel did.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That brings a little bit of relief. Cody, you got any questions?
um I have a couple. One of them I think I pretty much answered myself throughout the course of this, and
Uh-huh.
it's how have things changed in EMS from when you started to when you ended your career, or even now? And I pretty sure the answer to that is the more everything changes, the
Yeah.
the more it stays the same. Um, but specifically, is there anything that you noticed that I'm about to lose my audio. Um, what are the biggest changes that you've seen in EMS since you started Freedom House to the time that you retired?
Well, obviously, as far as patient care treatments, you expect change along those lines and things like that. But one of the things that I um, have noticed, and I have been traveling around the country at speaking to different EMS organizations, EMS conferences, and things like that. Uh, I, it has been brought to my attention that there's a personnel shortage, and as well as the diversity efforts. Um, and what I've discovered is that EMS systems have kind of stopped reinvesting into the communities in which they serve. And as a result of that, you only know about EMTs and or paramedics when they come to your door and have to transport you to the emergency room. I believe if the EMS systems would start reinvesting into the communities, it's easy to put on Facebook or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever that we're hiring. But if I don't use those formats, I don't know. So
Mhm.
I would love to see EMS systems around the country start reinvesting back into the communities in which they're served because that's where your allies are. And so, you have community days, you have go out there, community centers, go to uh, teach CPR courses in the communities, ride around in the community in your vehicle and stuff. And it's interesting because years ago when we worked at Freedom House, we would go into the community and go to a restaurant and stuff like that to eat lunch or whatever. We could park our truck a block away with the windows down and the engine running, and no one would touch it. No one, because of the reputation and the respect that we had from the residents of the community. And I know because I did it. So I also know that once you re-engage to the communities, you could get people because that's what I did with my diversity recruitment program. I went out into the community and recruited people from the community. And because you'd be surprised the support you'll get from the community. And this is probably a long answer to your question. Is years ago, uh, the city of Pittsburgh had a financial crisis, and they decided in order to handle this, we're going to close some fire stations. And when they did that, attempted to do it, the community came out in support of the firefighters and forced the city not to close the fire stations. So, what department do you think they looked at next?
EMS.
Absolutely, because the department had not reinvested in the community. So, you know, who are they? We can get rid of them because
Mhm.
we don't know what they do or where they are. I don't need them or anything. So they totally eliminated the EMT program because we had like a two-tiered response system. It's back now, but we had a two-tiered response system, and they just eliminated due to budget constraints. So the department now has really stepped up its effort to reinvest itself in the community, and I would love to see that with the EMS systems across the country because I know it works.
I think it's starting to. The sad part is unfortunately a lot of the standalone EMS systems are getting absorbed by fire departments, and
Mhm.
they're now becoming fire-based EMS, which just all that does is it starts to erase history. It starts to get rid of everybody's knowledge of what EMS actually is, and they already associate EMS now with the fire system
Right,
as it is. But
right.
slowly, that's the way things are starting to go. I mean, we see it going that way here in our own city, and there's not really a good answer for it,
And
other than
and
what you said, of course.
yeah, and I understand that. And Pittsburgh EMS is one of the few third service EMS systems in the country. Uh, and it's also, when it first started, it was the only self-supporting system in public safety. And and due to third party billing. So, they bring in probably 25, $30 million a year in third party billing. And so, which is able them to maintain their separate entity. They are a department within the public safety department, as opposed to part of the fire service,
Mhm.
and they've been able to maintain that for 50 years. Yeah,
I think one of the things that I would like to see happen to EMS, we hear your story and how Freedom House grew so quickly in such a short period of time. And it seems like not everywhere, but it seems like EMS has kind of fallen back a little bit. And you hear people saying how, we're not respected. We're not respected by the nurses. We're not respected by the doctors or whatever. And some of that is true, but I think a lot of that is on us. Like we're not doing what we should be doing to earn that respect. And it can be done because we've seen what happened with Freedom House. It's obviously possible to earn that respect and to do that,
absolutely.
but we need to step up as a community, as an EMS community. We need to step up and we need to earn that respect, not just with hospitals, but earn that respect with our community. And it's by doing the things that you said, going out there and being a part of the community, showing them what EMS is, teaching them about it, introducing ourselves, being part of,
Right,
participating in events and, fire departments and police departments, they do it all the time. We should be
right.
doing that too. We're the
Absolutely.
youngest public safety entity in the
Hmm.
country.
Hmm.
We should be leading the way on these things. Just my 2 cents. Cody, you got
Which is
anything else for Mr. Moon here?
Yeah, and my last question for you
yeah,
is, as we're going through this, and we've talked about all kinds of stuff that were not taught to us about EMS history in our early days of learning and textbooks and all of that. What do you personally want to see, or if it could be changed, what do you want to see changed in the teaching of that EMS history?
great question. It's my desire to have the history of EMS taught in every EMT program, every paramedic training program, and every EMS physician's training program, because that's a specialty based on uh, Freedom House. And until we're able to accomplish that, despite the fact that we wrote the very first paramedic training manual, as I travel around the country and I've gone to different venues and conferences, I always stop at Bartlett Books. And I've come across, over the period of time during my travels, I came across the paramedic training manual, emergency care in the streets, and they talk about the history of EMS. And they talk about how great the systems are in Seattle and Los Angeles and Miami and Jacksonville and things like that. And they have a footnote about Freedom House, and we're listed only as a group of black men that didn't have an opportunity to get a high school education. And that's it. But we wrote the book. So those are the types of things that I use as motivators. And I had an opportunity to talk to the National Association of EMS Educators a couple of years ago, And I brought that up. Unbeknownst to me, at that conference was a editor from Bartlett Books, and she came up and apologized because she knew firsthand that what I was saying was true, and said she would do everything in her power to change that. So I just discovered a month ago that Freedom House is listed in the EMT emergency care book, or what is it, AAOS, or book that's out now. Talk about the history of it, and it also lists um, yours truly as the first person to do a tracheal intubation in the field. So I know there's results that are coming out of all this work that's being done, and
Just another
so
challenge.
yes, it's still you're right. It's still a challenge. Yeah, absolutely right. It's still a challenge, which which is fine. Which is fine. Uh, Next Thursday, I'm heading out to Memphis, no, somewhere in Tennessee, uh, to talk to a group of EMS physicians there. Um,
Well, I
in and
hope
out.
I've got a friend that he's a physician down in Memphis, and I hope he attends this as well. He's an awesome dude. He comes from a background of his father was a physician. Easter Day, Cody, for your background.
Mhm.
Um, Amazing kid. He's actually a surgeon, and I hope he attends that if he
Yeah,
has the opportunity, because it would be great for him too.
yeah. So it's
Well,
my hope that you guys help me put the word out there.
that's the
Absolutely.
plan. The plan is to try to get this information out, uh, harder than I've ever gotten anything out on and these interviews before. Like, this is my main focus right now. I want to get this word out.
Mhm.
I've got one last question for you.
Yes.
Um, this is a question that I try to ask just about everybody I interview, but it means a little bit more right now. So, if you had a chance to meet your younger self, what is one piece of advice that you would give yourself?
Um, Actually, I would probably congratulate myself. That may sound self-absorbed or whatever the case is. Um, I am at the point in my younger self, looking back on it, I wasn't as determined as I am now. Now I'm more resilient, uh, persevering, and determined to accomplish whatever goal I set out to be. Uh, that you create over a period of time through life experiences. So um, I early on in my life, I had pity parties for John Moon, and I think that in its infancy may have kind of stifled my progress, for lack of a better term. And so I'm not necessarily blaming myself for it. It's just a mere fact that um, I have to look back at where I came from to get to the point where I am now. And um, in my mind, not being self promoting, I would have to say a job well done.
I'd give
Cody,
the
you got any
younger version of John Moon a job well done as well.
Thank you. Thank
100%.
you.
Cody, you got any final thoughts?
No, it has been an honor and a privilege, Mr. Moon. I hope that numerous people see this episode and learn something from it, and and take something positive away from it. And thank you for taking the time
Yeah.
and being a part of this.
And I really appreciate this opportunity. And one thing I like to tell people is, even though I'm the one that you're talking to, um, it's not necessarily about me as an individual as it is about an organization, a group of visionaries that saw a need in an underserved community, and they took that vision to another visionary, Dr. Safar, who gave that vision to a group of creative change makers who were the people that worked at Freedom House, who took it out to the streets. And born out of that was the EMS system that we all take for granted today. And as we talked about, is glorified on television. And that's the legacy that I like for Freedom House to be remembered as. Not necessarily as John, I'm just the template or the platform that's being used to get that message out there. But it's about these group of visionaries that saw a need and stepped up and did that.
Mr. Moon, this episode has made my heart and soul very happy. I have enjoyed every minute of this conversation with you. So I am forever grateful, and like I said, I am going to make it my mission to spread the word of this amazing organization and spread your word as well. I think this was awesome. Thank you very much for joining us.
So thank you both, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And you all have a great weekend. But reach out to me anytime. Okay.
You as well, sir.
Okay.